Welcome to the Electric Wire podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristin Gilkes.
Welcome back to the Electric Wire. There's been a lot of recent commentary about the future of electric reliability here in Wisconsin and across the Midwest. Some suggest we're on the brink of reliability failures, rising electricity demand will overwhelm the system, and that Wisconsin needs to dramatically change how we regulate our utilities. But the reality is far more measured and far more reassuring. Wisconsin's electric grid remains one of the most reliable in the country. And while other states that rely on unregulated electricity markets have faced serious reliability challenges, Wisconsin's longstanding regulatory model continues to provide affordable, stable, and dependable power. Today, we're joined by Scott Smith, who is the Vice President of Business and Regulatory Strategy at Madison Gas and Electric, and John Jicha, who is the Assistant Vice President of Electric Supply at Madison Gas and Electric. Both are experts who have followed these issues closely. We'll break down what the data actually says about Wisconsin's energy system today, what's driving these conversations about reliability, and how policy decisions, including those within the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, will shape both risks and opportunities as we plan for the future. Thank you both again for joining me today. And let's start with the big picture. John and Scott, how would you characterize the actual state of electric reliability in Wisconsin and the Midwest?
I think, Kristin, overall, the electric grid in Wisconsin and even the wider Midwest, which is managed by MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, that operates like in 15 states across the Midwest and a little bit in the South, remains extremely reliable. We consistently have met demand, and we have really robust systems in place to minimize outages. You think about our strength, it really lies in years of investment in infrastructure. We really have a diverse energy mix across the MISO, and we have strong planning and coordination through MISO, which utilities like MG&E actually participate in. I would say we should acknowledge that the landscape is rapidly changing now, but bringing both opportunities and challenges to maintaining that reliability. One of the things is the accelerated energy transition, that you're retiring coal plants and replacing them with wind and solar. And how do we be able to firm that up to be able to create resources that are more dispatchable? And then I think secondly is exploding electricity demand from data centers and things like that are increasing loads across MISO's footprint.
Perfect. So when some say that we're on the brink of reliability failures, you look at the data, and could you tell us what do the data from MISO and NERC and independent monitors actually show about resource adequacy and risk?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty critical question. And it's essential to look at the actual data analysis, not only for MISO, but also their independent market monitor to get a clearer picture. Why some might express significant concerns. The reality is that the MISO grid, which does include Wisconsin, is really demonstrating resiliency and adaptability in the face of really unprecedented change. In the immediate future, we are meeting our resource adequacy requirements, meaning the lights are expected to stay on. And while it's true that our surplus capacity has tightened and capacity prices have increased, it's particularly like in the summer of this past planning year, this is actually really a positive signal. It's designed to incentivize crucial new investment in generation, right? That's what it's really designed for. So as you think about longer term and in future years, 5-10 years out, we need to continue to evolve and to put a new generation on the grid to be able to stabilize reliability in the long term. But in the short term, definitely we are highly reliable, especially in the Midwest, the upper Midwest.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, John. The MISO really is designed to evaluate what that risk is, right? And so I think that their move towards a seasonal construct is going to give us more valuable insights. Just as we're adding more and more intermittent resources, it's important to know kind of how they're going to perform in the marketplace. And that's, MISO is really doing an excellent job trying to analyze all of that.
Agreed. We're in the dog days of summer right now as we're recording this, and there's been some really high heat days this summer. How do you think MISO has performed during the recent extreme weather events or peak demand situations? Have we seen any actual reliability failures?
No, in this summer, especially in the upper Midwest, we have not. And actually, yesterday, the U.S. set a peak hour for electricity between like 6 and 7 our time, and there were no real issues, especially like in the Midwest. I think when you think about MISO is really has a unique footprint. It's got the upper Midwest, which Wisconsin is part of it, and it has the South. The upper Midwest has always planned for those extreme days, be it weather related, be it seasonal related. So we typically don't have the issues that maybe other parts of the country have, like the South, like just for the fact of it gets cold and they sometimes have electric generation that's not winterized. But in the upper Midwest, MISO performs extremely well. And the reason it performs extremely well is the utilities are extremely proactive in providing reliability across their generating units.
Yeah, I think really, I'd attribute the success to a combination of factors. We've seen improved generator readiness, we've seen better forecasting, and really coordination with all of the MISO members, of which MG&E is a member, or all of the MISO members. So really kind of that coordination, as John was talking about, kind of everybody participating, everyone looking out for the reliability of the overall grid has really been a benefit.
It's encouraging that we're good now, but we're forecasting a lot of load growth. There's been a lot of attention on electricity demand growing from AI and data centers. How significant is this trend, and how do we forecast it?
I think it's an important question. When we think about the growth coming from for load, nothing's more significant than data centers right now. And we see that across not only MISO, but across the country right now. And I think it's very important that we as utilities, as well as MISO, as well as regulatory bodies, recognize the fact that these loads come on quickly. And how do you serve that? And how do you plan for that? We have to be very, conscious of ensuring that we have the generation as well as the transmission to be able to serve these in the times that we need. If you think about Wisconsin, I mean, we have an obligation to serve. And these customers come to us, or any customer in that matter. It's a responsibility of us to figure out a way to serve them that's affordable to all of our customers. So I think it's important. It's real. We already see it in Wisconsin and different parts of the state. But it really comes down to planning and to be able to have a diverse generation portfolio to serve those in a reliable and affordable manner.
Yeah, it's really, I think, the combination of utilities working with developers to really understand what their timelines are, what their load profiles are, and then really working with the MISO to make sure that these loads are incorporated into their transmission and capacity planning, just so we kind of have that full picture and are really, kind of developing the system to meet those future demands.
Do you think any of the projected capacity needs are overstated? And what would explain the disconnect between the projections and the actual outcomes?
Yeah, I think, when MISO forecasts future capacity needs, it's a really complex task, right? And while MISO does project very large needs, especially in the near future, as well as post 2030, I think a lot of people believe they're overstated from a capacity need perspective. And really this stems from the arguments from MISO's models, could be making certain assumptions that kind of influence that projected gap. Most importantly, I think when you look at MISO, if they build out all renewables, right, you need to way overbuild the renewables to ensure that you have 24/7. If you build out renewables plus storage plus natural gas from a reliability perspective, you need a significant amount of less overall installed capacity to be able to meet those needs. So I think it's a combination of how MISO looks at things in regards of certain futures look at high renewables and very low dispatchable generation versus other models that people have argued about that the reality is going to be, it's going to be somewhat in between. You'll have some dispatchable, some renewable, and then obviously batteries in there as well as natural gas to kind of offset the reliability of when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah, I think that, the projections the MISO has, they're intentionally conservative, and that's a real good thing, because they're designed to ensure that we have a reliable system under worst case scenarios. And so that type of planning really helps us all out to ensure we keep the lights on.
Thank you both for that. I want to just shift gears slightly and talk about the regulatory climate. Some have suggested Wisconsin should deregulate our electric market. Based on real world performance, how does our regulated model compare to deregulated states in terms of price and reliability? Scott, I'm looking at you as you oversee regulatory matters at MG&E. So really appreciate having your perspective here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with Wisconsin, and Wisconsin specifically, the regulatory model that we have here, it has consistently delivered stable prices and high reliability. And that's really what our customers are looking for. If you contrast that with a deregulated state such as Texas, you see real high volatility in prices as well as reliability challenges, especially during extreme weather. As John said, some of the plants are not hardened for weather events. And so when those weather events occur, you have outages and widespread outages because they weren't incented to make those types of investments. You contrast that with Wisconsin, where we have extremely high reliability and really regular prices. If you think, just over time, just drawing that Wisconsin line versus an unregulated utility, you'll see a stark contrast.
Along those lines, what would some of the potential risks be for Wisconsin customers if we were to deregulate our market?
I think that the one that customers would notice right away is price volatility due to market fluctuations. You'd also see reduced investment for long-term infrastructure. And you'd see really weakened oversight of reliability and consumer protections. I mean, those are things that if you go to a deregulated state, you'll hear customers talking about those three items.
When we talk about Wisconsin being a regulated state, the key regulator is the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. And recently, some have raised concerns about the pace of regulatory approvals in Wisconsin. But how does the Public Service Commission approach innovation while balancing its responsibility to ensure affordability and reliability?
Yeah, I think the Public Service Commission really takes that responsibility seriously. While some might see the process as slow, it's really designed to ensure that projects are reviewed and determined to be cost effective, environmentally sound, and in the public interest. Just looking over the past few years, the commission has approved thousands of megawatts of new capacity, solar, wind, battery storage, some gas. And they've also supported some pilot programs for grid modernization, time of use rates. So I don't really see that as stagnation. There's really a thoughtful and deliberate process. I do think that there's opportunities to, once we've kind of gone through something, how can we learn from that and then accelerate it going forward? Instead of kind of going through, sometimes we get the same questions on projects, and we've answered it previously and it's the same answer. How do we kind of move that process to kind of expedite some things?
I've read some pieces out there saying that prices would come down if Wisconsin were to deregulate. I know what our answer is from CFC, but I'm interested, what is the the thought about deregulation and its impact on prices, and have states who have the handful of states who have deregulated, what are the cost trends there compared to regulated states like Wisconsin?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the data, Kristen, the deregulated states, sometimes they have lower wholesale prices, but that doesn't mean that those prices reach the customer, right? And so, they might have lower rates for a period of time, but then they'll just, they'll have a shortage because they haven't made the prudent investments, and then they'll have, extreme rate increases. And again, you contrast that to Wisconsin, where we have rates that are very competitive and very stable. And so that really helps us make those investments for the future in infrastructure and clean energy, customer programs. We can do all of those things on behalf of our customers, where it's a lot more difficult in those deregulated states.
That's why I think the PSC made a point in the most recent strategic energy assessment that there's a difference between rates and total customer bills.
That's right.
So while rates may, suggest one thing, the actual customer bill could suggest another, and we're in a different place in the rankings when you look at total customer bills. So, and that's one misunderstanding. My next question for both of you is going to be if you could correct one major misunderstanding about Wisconsin's energy system or its reliability. What would it be? What would you correct?
I can go first, Scott. I think, you think about, I think it's the idea that, that there's challenges. The primary fault of those challenges are really failed regulatory system, or that regulatory has blocked these necessary changes. And that's just not true. Like as Scott said, I think, we have a process in place that allows us to plan strategically for reliability across the state, as well as affordability for our customers. And the Public Service Commission is really there to make sure that, those two things happen, right? We are reliable, and we are doing exactly what, from affordability from our customer perspective. So I think it's really about, it's to think about the process as a whole and as a benefit to our customers than as independent options there.
Yeah, I think the biggest misunderstanding is that Wisconsin is lagging in the energy transition. I think if you look at reality, we're really making some steady strategic progress. Just taking MG&E, for example, we have a commitment to net zero carbon by 2050. And we have significantly grown our share of solar and wind. We're also introducing batteries into our system. We've also, invested in EV infrastructure, grid modernization, customer programs to kind of help customers if they want to go further faster than us. So I think that, all of that and the state's regulatory framework really help us to ensure that this transition is not just fast, but it's equitable, reliable, and most importantly, in my mind, affordable.
Let's turn to the recently enacted big, beautiful bill. There's a lot of provisions relating to the energy sector. Hoping you could tell us about some of the key provisions and how they will affect renewable energy development in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think the big, beautiful bill, it's really designed to roll back clean energy tax credits, right? That's the big issue that utilities are facing. Just when you think about these credits and how they may affect wind and solar, and just the pace that you have to have them in by. So I think it's a reevaluation of plans more in the longer term than in the shorter term in regards of, post 2027, just as a date that the big beautiful bill kind of lays out there for in-service date. It makes us think about our planning a little bit differently in regards of, once those tax credits go away, how do we think through new innovation in solar and wind, and are they still cost effective? And I think, in a long term, they're still going to be cost effective. I mean, you're seeing not just costs in certain technologies increase, but we're seeing increases in all all technologies across the board. So it's really about understanding what those rules are and then incorporating those into our planning process.
Yeah, I think, from a utilities perspective, we just want to understand what the rules are, and then we'll figure out the least cost plan in that paradigm, right? And so, that's really the question we have right now is really, is there going to be additional guidance from the Treasury Department that's going to, kind of change our understanding of safe harboring? But once we have rules in place, as long as we believe that we can plan for that, as John said, I think we'll continue to be able to make this transition.
That's good. So that being said, are there any changes, either statutory or procedural, that we should consider to streamline the approval process while maintaining transparency and consumer protections?
Yeah, I think the commission has the tools. The commission has done a great job of, I think maybe if they could prioritize some of these renewable projects that might be, kind of in that timeline that John talked about, just so we can kind of get shovels in the ground sooner rather than later, then all of our customers benefit from that. But I think, the commission's done a great job of processing applications in the past, and I think they'll continue to do that. It's just, is there a way to try to expedite and focus on some pending applications?
Good to know. Thank you. Right, John, I'm gonna turn back to you. So given the provisions in the big beautiful bill, how do assumptions about the resource mix, like renewables versus storage or dispatchable generation, how does this all affect capacity forecasts and sort of a forecast about the resource mix?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the discussion in regards how MISO really is planning for the future to provide reliable service across their footprint, right? And if you think about, regardless of the bill or not, you have to have dispatchable generation to be able to be reliably ensure that the lights don't go off in all hours of the day. So, I think we touched about it on it earlier. MISO is proactively, with or without the bill, has proactively done things to ensure reliability across our footprint. They introduced in 2023 the seasonal construct, that they have identified that not all generation types or resources have the same attributes, right? More solar in the summer, less in the winter in the upper Midwest. So they introduced a seasonal construct. They're also going to introduce future rule changes as well that will affect accreditation of different types of resources to ensure the reliable nature of the grid. So what that means from a planning perspective, we have an obligation not only to the Public Service Commission to meet certain requirements, the resource adequacy, we also have it from MISO as well. And to get there, it's a combination, and it still is a combination of resource types, having gas generation, having batteries, storage, to meet those hours when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, really, goes to that reliability discussion. But you want to ensure that we have enough energy, and energy comes from wind and solar. So as you move into the future, you're still going to see potentially increases in wind and solar because they become cost effective still, as you think about, long-term projections to get to net zero, right, of your 2050.
Is there anything that needs to happen next to ensure that Wisconsin doesn't miss the opportunity for federal investment and the long-term energy transition?
Kristin, I think we're on a great path. I think if you look at MG&E's trajectory, we've made some great strides. As I said, I think that once we have a clear understanding of what the rules are, we'll be able to work with developers, work with our community, work with our customers, work with the commission, just to ensure that we continue on that trajectory.
Is there anything you're waiting for to know what the rules will be, and anything that would give a little bit more certainty?
Yeah, I think once the Treasury Department provides the guidance that was included in the president's executive order, that will provide us with some more information as to exactly what those safe harbor rules are. And that'll let us to plan accordingly.
All right. So looking ahead, what is the real work that needs to be done to ensure Wisconsin continues to have affordable and reliable electricity over the next decade?
The commission is really the linchpin, to ensure that all of our projects, all of our clean energy projects are cost effective, reliable, and in the public interest. So I think, really working with the commission, ensuring that the commission has enough staff, has enough opportunities to review things, is really going to be critical as we move forward.
I think it's, it goes back to it's, from a planning perspective, we need to ensure that we're putting reliable resources that are cost effective on the grid, as well as, I think, being cognizant of new technologies. All right. I think, as Scott said, in the short term, we have this need that we have an opportunity really to get these projects, these renewable projects that we have at the commission in front of them today, approved and moved and shovels in the ground here in the near term. But long term, we have to think strategically too about new technologies and how do those impact reliability and affordability for customers. And we constantly look at those types of things to ensure that we're doing the best things for the customers of our service territory.
All right. Well, our last question for all of our guests that I will ask you both is, if you had all the power in the industry, what would you do with it? Scott, I'll start with you.
Kristin, I've been waiting to answer this question. I've been listening to your podcast forever. And thinking, wow, what a great question.
You've been on before, Scott, right?
But I think, what I would do is I'd invest in transmission, I'd streamline permitting, and I'd double down on workforce development. I don't know if I can have all three, but those are the three things that I think are the most important to kind of, move us all forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like I mentioned, you have been on before, and it's kind of important to note how much things have changed. You were probably on 4 years ago in 2021, and we're talking about some of these same issues, but I think your all the power answer today would be extremely different than it was in the past. And it's just changed a lot with all the load growth that's happening.
We're in a very different world today.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. All right, John, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's speed to market. I mean, I think when you think about it, Scott hit part of it on the head. Like, transmission is such a big thing, and it just doesn't move at the same pace as generation. So to me, is how do you get transmission built sooner? And when you really think about, across the country, right? Like, we've got renewables in certain parts of our country that just don't have the transmission capacity to move it to the markets, right? Which would have a huge savings for customers across those footprints, as well as, the speed to market in regards to generation projects too. We talked about, significant load increases that are projected for the future. To be able to meet those loads, we have to be able to bring on generation to serve those loads. So I really think it's speed to market, transmission, and then generation as well.
Thank you both so much for joining. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter @The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.